Introduction. Firstly, thank you, Carrie, for inviting me, and Larry for introducing this talk. And I was incredibly excited to hear your insights into Gian Carlo's reality. I met Menotti quite a few years ago, and significantly for me, I started, as Caroline hinted, I started in another world of opera production as a designer. And my very first production was at the English National Opera in London in 1979, designing a very rare at that time opera called Julius Caesar by Handel, which has since become, in the last 40 years, has become a staple of any opera company with any pretensions to being international. They will mount Julius Caesar first, or in its Italian form, Giulio Cesare. The production that I designed, for which I designed the sets, won the Evening Standard Award and immediately toured the world and now exists within the Metropolitan Opera's repertoire. They bought it in 1988 and we revamped it. And at that time I was so excited to be a designer and was launched by the good fortune of having been invited to design something that was very rare, so it got a lot of attention, with the fact that we were given this award, and then I was taken along as a piece of hand baggage with the production to whichever opera house in the world was being presented. I suddenly had an international career. I was then invited by Dame Joan Sutherland and Richard Bonning to design her 30th anniversary production at the Royal Opera House, Lucrezia Borgia, and that was within 6 months. And then at the same time I met Gian Carlo Menotti, and I was asked to then design his 75th birthday production of A Manon Night Visitors, which is mounted by the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. So I started in this design world and had a ridiculously fast start to my career. And in the way that is so typical of many of us, was never satisfied. And I remember having lunch with Gian Carlo in his beautiful castle in Scotland one day, and he was saying, "Oh, John, what do you want to do? You have so much success. You want to do anything?" I said, "Of course I want to do something else. I want to direct." And he said, "Well, what would you like to direct?" I said, I have no idea, I just want to start directing. And over the course of a long luncheon, he made a suggestion to me, which I think only a person of a certain naivete, as I certainly was at that time, and of tremendous youth, which was doubly the case at that time, I bluffed my way through lunch when he suggested that perhaps I should design Platé. I had no idea what Platé was, but as he suggested it as a directing project, I assumed it was an opera. I had no idea at all, and he said, "Oh, what do you think about Platé?" And I said, "Oh, I think it's marvelous." "Well, what do you think, Gian Carlo?" And he said, "Oh, did you see our production this year in Spoleto, Italy? The frogs, they were ridiculous. Didn't you think?" I said, "Oh, Gian Carlo, the frog. But what do you think the frog should be?" So he told me what the frog should be and asked me what I thought. And I said, "I'm not going to tell you anything. I will tell you in a week's time by showing you the designs. I'm actually working on the opera myself at the moment." God forgive me. So, "Oh, John, okay, you're doing the project." I said, "I've already got it ready. It's so interesting you like it." Because honestly, I'd never heard of it until 6 months ago. So I was sent in the Daimler limousine back to the airport in Edinburgh to catch the flight down to London. And we had already got this meeting the next week at Covent Garden for him to see the final model for the Manon Night Visitors. And as I got to the airport, I borrowed £0.50 from somebody to make a phone call. We didn't have cell phones at that time, and if we did, I wouldn't have been able to afford to have one. And I phoned my manager in London and said, "What's Platé?" And he said, "It's fantastic." Why? And I told him the story. And he picked me up at the airport and gave me a recording of this, and I have to say, I went home and I designed the first scene and 4 of the 10 costumes that first night. It was such an instantaneous contact with me. And I think it's a mark of Gian Carlo, one of the aspects of Gian Carlo's genius, that he instinctively knew to whom he should offer a project and who might be able to carry it through. I've had the great privilege of working with myriad artists at the top level in my very long career. And so many of them have passed, as did I, under the eyes of Gian Carlo, who was able to see straight into their reality and know what they might be able to do in excelsis. And in fact, the Platé production, which I think was in 87, I may be wrong, maybe 77, I think it was 87, marked my debut as a director-designer, and was something of a success. It then went to New York the next year, at the same time as the aforesaid Julius Caesar was opening at the Met, and I remember that, working at warp speed. I remember my New York debut being, I had 2 shows opening the same week, one directing and designing at the BAM, and 4 days later opening the Metropolitan Opera House with Julius Caesar. So the debut that for which I was so grateful came directly from Gian Carlo and from Nigel Redden. And my relationship with both of those gentlemen exists from that time, and I am especially honoured this year to be invited by Nigel to come and be part of the festival celebration of Gian Carlo's centenary. As I have since that first contact, I've worked on 6 projects with Gian Carlo, and the last one, last year, of course, Gian Carlo had already been dead for a couple of years, but when Nigel asked me, very, very soon after the premiere of The Floor that I created last year, to come back and direct and design this, it was one of those moments in life when I just thanked my gods, whoever they are out there, for the great fortune to be invited back to what is certainly the most beautiful city in the whole of America, and to work again in this superb theatre, and to be part of a celebration of somebody who is at the very root of my career, and who has been an incredibly significant and inspiring person for me to have had the great fortune to have met, and with whom I was able to work. The other aspect with Gian Carlo that I think is important to say, before I give you a quick resume of the medium, is that he was astonishingly excited by people being honest with him. And one of the aspects of my character is that I'm unfortunately rather too honest in my dealings with too many people. And my friends forgive me and sometimes even like me for it, and my enemies never speak to me again. But Gian Carlo, having been so famous for so long and being such a star in the genuine sense of the word, often said to me that he never knew what people felt. Of course, he always knew what I felt because I would tell him when he asked me. And the thing that was so extraordinary about him, I remember my last meeting with him in Lescaut House, which was, he died in 2007 during the rehearsals of The Medium in Monte Carlo, which is my last contact with him. But the last time I was with him in his beautiful castle in Scotland was 2 years beforehand, and he's at the age of 93, I guess, and he said he was wanting to rework some of his plays, and would I please critique one of them, which was The Leper. And I read it and was frankly appalled. I said, why does anybody know The Leper? Yeah, has anybody read this or seen it? Yes, Larry has. Anybody else? It's a story of a prince in some kind of, is it fair to say, mythical? It's very difficult to know exactly. It's an ancient time, let's put it that way. It feels somehow biblical, but it's not clear. And he has leprosy, and he is ultimately the outsider. And he complains because he is bereft of the family money, etc. And when his mother, the Queen, eventually gives him all of the treasures that he feels he needs, he hoards them. And I said to Gian Carlo, why do you want your outsider, who is of course the hero of the piece, to not then be the person who gives life to people? Why does he have to be this horrible selfish person who holds everything to himself? I was struck by, I hate to use such a cliched word, but I was struck by the nobility of his response. And he said, it's a very just criticism and I need to think about that, and I think I need to rework it. And to have a great figure like Gian Carlo responding to a negative piece of input about one of his great plays was, I thought, a tremendous mark of the man, and a model that I singularly fail to incorporate when I'm giving criticism. But at least I know it's something to which I need to attain. So, aspire rather. So to get to the medium, I was fortunate to be invited to design it first for Gian Carlo as set and costume designer in 2000 for the 2002 Spoleto Festival. And I was at that time, which has been 9 or 10 months beforehand, I was working on another project with Gian Carlo with the Tolzer Knabenchor in Munich. And we were doing an opera by Mozart called Apollo here sing to us with these young boys from the choir, and at the same time starting preparations for the medium. And when I was in Munich, in a brief period of time off, I went around the Schatzmuseum, the treasure house, which was the most beautiful. Anybody been to the treasure house in Munich? Yes. Do you remember all the Cuvier carvings, wonderful gilded salon, and each room more spectacular, beautiful than the last? And I don't know how many of you were enchanted by 18th century spectacle, but for me that doesn't get much better apart from the Rinascimento in Italy. So I was going around with my mouth hanging open, sort of drooling. And then the last room, I don't know if you remember it, but the last room was a room dedicated to photographs of Munich after the Second World War. And it was basically a wasteland. And there was photograph after photograph of, as far as the eye could see, rubble. Now, I was born, I love saying this, in the first half of the last century, in 1959. And I remember as a kid, I was born up in the West Country of Britain, just outside of the city called Bath. When we would go into Bath, which was either a short train journey in or with bicycle in, or it wasn't very far, it was within the distance that kids could actually manage to get in and have some free time. We would, as kids, we'd play in the bomb sites, and I remember bouncing up and down on a staircase in some massive mansion that was detached from the walls. I can't imagine what danger my brother and I were in, but I remember bouncing up and down on this huge 18th century staircase that was just, just hanging free with open space either side. We thought this was very exciting. So I had some sense of the effects of war in my own life, but I also was very aware of the fact that we were fortunate in having a very, very small television. It was that big, the screen. And I remember all the films where there were a lot of films with anti-Germanic subjects, and the Nazi was the enemy. So for me, when I was in Munich and I saw these incredible ruins, it was the first time, and I was no child at this time, I was in my late 30s, it was the first time that I'd actually, incredible to say, realized the horror that the war had been in Germany. And the last photograph that I looked at, and there is a point to this long story, by the way, the last photograph, this is the point, the last photograph at which I looked was a photograph of another incredible vista with just a few kind of skeletons of houses still left, but miles and miles, as far as you could see, of shattered ruins. And in the foreground was a string quartet playing, I don't know what, I think Schubert, and they were all in white tie. And then by the side there was a rather grand-looking gentleman, and it said underneath, "We will rebuild." And then there was a note underneath the photograph, and it said that this was the mayor of Munich, a photograph taken in 1946, saying that they would rebuild the city. And then underneath that, it said, "You are standing, looking at this photograph, at exactly the point from which this photograph is taken." And if you look to the bottom right-hand corner of the photograph, there was a piece of carving, I think it was a cherub or something. And that cherub is to your right, and I looked up, and there indeed was this wonderful ceiling, carved rococo scrolls, etc. And you're standing where this photograph was taken. And I don't mean in the sense of, but tears poured down my face. It was the first moment that I had understood, in a way that was different than my understanding of the Second World War up until that point. I had understanding of some aspect of this tremendous suffering and ruin that was wrought by the war. I went back for a meeting with Gian Carlo to discuss the medium, and I said, "When did you write this? Wasn't it 46? And he said, "Yes, I wrote it in 46, I think we put it on in 47. And I said, "Well, how much of the war came into your awareness of this? It's talking about a woman who's talking about the dead and making contact with the other world, etc." And he said, "Oh, the suffering was incredible. I had so many family in Italy who were destroyed by this." And I said, "So it had a tremendous effect on you. So why don't we set it in 1946 in Europe, in this bomb site?" He said, "Oh, John, it's a wonderful idea. You must do it sometime."